The Oscars. We love them, we hate them, we love to hate them. A showcase of the best artistry put to film that year from the companies rich enough to support an aggressive For Your Consideration campaign. The Oscars in particular, more than other awards shows, are a bit more known for celebrities and Academy members using their time on stage to advocate for political and socio-economic issues. Some of the speeches are very good, and others are very bad. And over the years, the reputation gained has been that a lot of the politically charged Oscar speeches and monologues come across as very virtue signally, even if the issues they talk about are worthy of discussion and support, simply because trying to cram a speech about an important social issue into the 30 seconds of relegated time can come across as shallow and tone-deaf, especially when the message is coming from rich elites. Now, the Academy itself has fallen into a lot of controversy surrounding social issues in its time, and by that I mean it has been in controversy surrounding social issues pretty much since its inception. This includes in recent years, as there has been more of a push for representation of women and minority groups in film, both in front of and behind the camera, as these are underrepresented groups within large parts of the industry. This all culminated into the somewhat infamous year of 2016, where a lot of the nominees in the major acting and artisan categories were overwhelmingly white and men, leading to calls of boycotts of the Oscars. I'm not going to comment deeply on that particular situation, but what's important to this discussion is that the president of the Academy of Motion Pictures at the time, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, came on stage during the ceremony to say this.
The Oscars celebrate the storytellers who have the opportunity to work in the powerful medium of film. And with that opportunity comes responsibility. Our audiences are global and rich in diversity, and every facet of our industry should be as well. Everyone in the Hollywood community has a role to play in bringing about the vital changes the industry needs so that we can accurately reflect the world today.
And now, in a supposedly similar spirit, the Oscars have released new guidelines surrounding diversity and inclusion for films to be eligible for the Best Picture category, starting with the 2024 Oscars. And there are some things that I think we need to talk about here. Let me start by being incredibly upfront. I have my problems with these guidelines that I'll get into, but if you came here expecting me to yell about how liberal Hollywood has gone too far this time, and how forced diversity is going to be the death of Western media or something, you've clicked on the wrong video. The TLDR of these guidelines is that they aren't going to change much at all about the current industry, or have any sort of significant impact. You may then ask, why even make a video? I'll get there. But first, let's talk about exactly what the guidelines are and what they say. If you already know and you're more interested in the commentary aspect, you can go ahead and skip to this timestamp. The Academy has released 4 standards, which are to essentially act as guidelines related to diversity and inclusion of women and minority groups. And these standards are only for a film to be eligible for the Best Picture category. For every other category, a film just has to meet the current standards for qualification. In order for a film to be eligible, it has to meet at least 2 of the 4 standards. Each standard is broken into subcategories, and a movie has to meet either one or some of these subcategories to be fulfilled. It varies from standard to standard. For Standard A film must meet one of these 3 subcategories to be fulfilled. At least one of the actors or significant supporting actors must be from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 30% of all actors in secondary or more minor roles are from at least 2 of the following groups: women, racial or ethnic minorities, the LGBTQ+, or people with cognitive or physical disabilities, and this includes those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And the final one, the main storyline, themes, or narrative of the film is centered on an underrepresented group. Standard B is again separated into 3 subcategories, and the film needs to only meet one for the standard to be considered fulfilled. At least 2 of the major leadership positions listed here need to be held by someone of an underrepresented group. The positions include cast casting director, cinematographer, composer, costume designer, director, editor, hairstylist, makeup artist, producer, production designer, set decorator, sound, VFX supervisor, and writer. And as an additional qualification, at least one of these positions must be held by a racial or ethnic minority. At least 6 other crew or team and technical positions, excluding production assistants, are from underrepresented racial groups. And last, at least 30% of the film's crew is made up of someone from an underrepresented group. Standard C has 2 categories, and a film has to meet both to consider the standard fulfilled. A film's production or financing company has to have paid apprenticeships or internships that are for those from an underrepresented group in pre-production, production, post-production, music, VFX, acquisitions, business affairs, distribution, and marketing and PR. And the companies must offer training and or work opportunities for below-the-line skill development to people from an underrepresented group. Standard D only has one qualification that needs to be fulfilled. The studio and or film company must have multiple in-house senior executives on their marketing, publicity, and or distribution teams from an underrepresented group. So those are the standards, and the thing is, the vast majority of films and film production companies already meet these no problem. Particularly standard C and D, which are the easiest to fulfill and keep fulfilled constantly. Even standard B isn't hard because a lot of costume designers, hairstylists, and makeup artists tend to skew towards the underrepresented groups. So what exactly is the problem here? First off, I just want to say that something like this feels very performative coming from the Academy, because as mentioned, they already aren't really all about the artistry of film and making sure that everyone is included at the table. It's more about who throws the most money at ads for the Oscars. Not always, of course, but let's be real, that's what happens a lot. I've also not forgiven them for the 2019 Oscars, which was a year there was a massive push for Black-led movies to win Best Picture, or at the very least be more recognized by the Academy, and they responded to this by giving the top prize to Green Book, which was easily the worst one they could have gone with. If you don't know about Green Book, it basically has a super oversimplified understanding of race relations and panders to the idea of, well, if we were all just nice to each other, all of our race-related problems would be solved. They passed over BlacKkKlansman, which really dealt with issues of racism, but they didn't even nominate the actual best movie that dealt with issues of systemic racism in America and was just one of the best movies in general to come out of 2018, If Beale Street Could Talk. The Academy is incredibly powerful and influential in the film world. If they were to seek out films actually made by these underrepresented groups that accurately depicted their struggles and aren't made by massive conglomerates with a lot of spare change for advertising, they would find them. They don't need to make a separate category for them, but amazing movies made by all sorts of groups are already out there. You just have to find them, and the Academy would have so much power to promote these films and get eyes on them, which would in turn help more of them get made and get recognition on the people who made them. But instead we get this do-nothing set of standards. So yes, this feels very shallow to me on top of not doing anything. I can at least appreciate and understand what they are trying to do, or at least what they are claiming to try and do. I believe in a truly genderless, raceless, just about any labelless society, but the society of today is not that based, and we have a lot of issues that still need to be addressed. But this is not the best way of going about it. The problem when you put hard numbers and essentially make a quota for situations like this is a couple of things. One, you are potentially punishing these companies for a problem that they didn't cause. And what I mean by that is, if a company doesn't have enough people that would help them fulfill the standards apply to the job positions, or they don't have enough people qualified for the position, it's not the company's fault that there are larger social and economic barriers keeping these people from having equal access to the education and resources they would need to apply and be qualified for the job. I place a heavy emphasis on the potentially part of that statement because I don't know the exact number breakdown for the types of people seeking jobs in that market or their qualifications, but if the quota is greater than the number of people from a certain group currently available within the market, that's where an issue will arise in this scenario. But I'm not too concerned about that part because these standards can easily be filled with the available market. I'm just making the point of how that can become an issue. But even though it's like that, really don't make the numbers for the quota higher, because that can exacerbate the part that I'm actually more concerned about, which is the part where tokenism and reduction of a person to their race or gender or sexuality, etc. takes place. Having a person's race, gender, sexuality, etc. being a factor in hiring them when the whole idea is that you don't want those things to matter is well-intentioned but incredibly insulting, and this is a type of identity politics that the Academy loves to pander to. Like how they brought a very accomplished female composer to the show this year just for a 2-minute segment of introducing the best score category, and they made a big deal about how she was the first female conductor ever at the Oscars, and then she just left, never to be heard from again. And the worst part, they didn't even mention a single accomplishment or any of her previous work. All of the emphasis was on her sex. I would be so pissed if I became accomplished in my field, but the only thing that people could say about me was my sex. I want to work in the movie industry, but I do not want to be known as a female writer or director or animator or whatever the hell I end up doing, and I never want to walk into a job interview and have my sex be a factor in if I get the job or not. That is far from the most important thing about a person. This does not mean that you ignore larger social issues a person faces. Those things need to be talked about, but there is a way to talk about the issues without reducing people to those experiences and then making that the most important adjective used to describe them. I find quotas a very counterintuitive way of trying to address the underrepresentation problem, and I really dislike them. And so far, I've focused a little bit more on the behind-the-scenes aspect of these guidelines, but arguably the most important part is representation in front of the camera, and this is definitely the most useless of the standards. Because here's the thing, have you ever heard the phrase, no representation is better than bad representation? It basically means that if you're going to have minorities or their issues be front and center in your movie, but you're going to portray them in harmful ways or have their issues presented in a dishonest way, there's no point in even having them there. These guidelines say nothing about how the underrepresented groups need to be portrayed on screen, so there is nothing stopping negative or harmful or stereotypical portrayals from happening, or these characters and actors being there just enough to meet the qualifications and essentially treating like a token, a one-way ticket to a potential Best Picture bid. And here's the thing, they can't write a need for good representation of underrepresented people and their stories into the rules because that would be impossible to enforce, because it's too vague and too subjective. You know that sassy black friend and a flaming gay stereotype who have no depth outside of being the black friend and the gay friend that helped the main white woman find true love in the big city? That passes the standard. For a bit more of a nuanced example, look at the Star Wars sequels. There were initially 2 and then 3 side characters in the main cast played by POC that initially at least seemed to have big important parts to play in the story, and then they got completely sidelined. And the actors have since started to come out and talk about their treatment by Disney while working for them and what their experience on set was like, and a lot of it isn't good. But that kind of thing falls into plausible deniability where you can't prove it was racism, so it ends up flying. And I am aware that rom-coms and Star Wars movies don't get to Best Picture nominations. But my point is, if even those movies can pass the standards, it just proves how useless the standard really is. So then you might say, well, the Oscars wouldn't nominate movies that did misrepresentation of minorities or their experiences, or ones that mistreated minority actors like that for Best Picture anyways, and maybe they wouldn't for overt discrimination, but Green Book won Best Picture last year. This type of thing still happens today, and the Academy helps it happen. So that's why I say it's very performative, very on brand for that liberal Hollywood form of dealing with the issues, and ultimately, it's pretty useless. Not really all that harmful in and of itself, but it's useless. To me, this feels like sticking a band-aid on a foundation crack. These guidelines aren't really going to help anything. Instead, the Academy could create programs and do internships with these companies and work with communities to try and encourage people from these groups to go into the industry and advocate for larger social and economic issues that contribute to these disparities in representation in the first place. Because that's the only real way that the meaningful change they they want is going to happen. And I wanted to talk about this because I knew that there would be an instant pushback from people saying that entertainment is dead now and this is the future liberals want, but I wanted to give my voice for why the guidelines aren't good, but from a different perspective than those loud voices. And to point out how performative this all is when they could easily work to make actual change happen. So the Academy needs to do better, and they need to do it differently than their current direction. I hope you enjoyed my kind of ranty rambling about this, but I ended up having way more thoughts about this than when I first saw the announcement and read the guidelines. And please, discussion on this is important, so feel free to discuss away down below. As always, I hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next one. Later.